I want you to do something for me. Picture the person you trust most in the world, the one you've built a life with, the one whose hand you hold in the dark. Now I want you to imagine that person looking you in the eyes, their face a perfect mask of sympathy, while they tell you a devastating lie, a lie that rips the floor out from under your world. Can you picture it? I don't have to. I lived it. My name is Camila, and this is the story of how I discovered my husband wasn't just a liar and a thief, but a stranger I had been sleeping next to for a decade. And it's the story of how the very things he stole to destroy me became the weapons I used to take back my life. This wasn't about revenge, not at first, it was about survival, but when you push someone who has nothing left to lose, you'd be amazed at what they find. Stay with me, because you are not going to believe how this ends. The air in our house felt wrong. It was thin and sharp, smelling of stale air, and the lemony furniture polish the police detective had accidentally smeared on his sleeve. My husband, Brent, was pacing the length of our living room, his hand theatrically pressed to his forehead like a silent film star in distress. He'd been doing this for an hour, reenacting his discovery for anyone who would listen. The two uniformed officers, the bewildered insurance adjuster, and me. "I just don't understand, Camila," he said, his voice cracking on cue. "I was only gone for a few hours. I ran to the hardware store. Who does this? In broad daylight?" I sat on the edge of our oversized armchair, the one we'd picked out together, and tried to make my face match his. I tried to look shattered, violated, and in a way I was. According to Brent, while I was away for the weekend visiting my sister, a burglar had forced the back door, bypassed our state-of-the-art security system, a system I had designed, ironically enough, and made a beeline for our master bedroom. They'd ignored the laptops, the television, the emergency cash I kept in a desk drawer. They'd gone straight for my jewelry box. And not just any jewelry, they had taken everything that mattered. My mother's pearls, the diamond earrings I'd bought with my first big bonus, and the centerpiece of my small collection, my grandmother's necklace. It was an antique piece, a cascade of sapphires and small diamonds that culminated in a single star-shaped stone my grandmother had nicknamed the Star of Anya. It was irreplaceable, less for its monetary value, and more for the lifetime of memories it held. Brent knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. His were warm and steady, mine were ice cold. "I'm so sorry, honey. I know what that necklace meant to you. I feel like I failed you. I should have been here." I squeezed his hand. "A lie. Don't be silly," I murmured. "It's just stuff. We're safe. That's what matters." Another lie. It wasn't just stuff, and I didn't feel safe at all. Something was crawling under my skin, a tiny, insistent whisper that told me this whole scene was wrong. The back door had been jimmied, but the damage was almost cosmetic, too neat for a frantic burglar. The bedroom was tossed, but it was a movie-set version of a ransacking cushions, overturned, drawers pulled out, but nothing actually broken or truly disturbed. It was chaos with an invisible tidiness to it. The police were sympathetic but clinical. They dusted for prints they knew they wouldn't find, took our statements, and left us with a case number and a pamphlet on victim support. The insurance adjuster was even more so, assuring us that our policy was excellent and the claim would be processed quickly. Through it all, Brent was the perfect picture of a devastated husband, his arm a permanent fixture around my shoulders, his voice a low, comforting rumble, but I watched him. When the adjuster mentioned the payout for the jewelry would be substantial, I saw something flicker in Brent's eyes. It wasn't greed, it was relief. A deep, profound exhale of a man who had just been pulled back from a cliff edge. And in that moment, the whisper in my gut became a roar. He thought he knew everything about that jewelry. He knew its monetary value because he'd insisted we get it reappraised for insurance purposes 6 months ago. He knew its sentimental value because I had told him the stories of my grandmother 100 times. He knew I was heartbroken. What he didn't know was that my jewelry wasn't just insured, it was fitted with the most advanced micro GPS trackers on the market. It was a perk from my previous life, my 5 years as a senior security strategist for a company that protected the assets of the world's wealthiest people. When the new line of trackers came out, no bigger than a grain of rice, with a battery life of over a decade, my team was allowed to test them on our own valuables. I'd had them professionally embedded in the clasps of my most precious pieces. Brent had laughed at me at the time. He called me paranoid. He'd said, "Who's going to steal from us, Kami? We live in the safest town in the state." That night, after he'd finally fallen asleep, his breathing deep and even beside me, I slipped out of bed. I took my laptop into the guest bathroom, the only room in the house without a direct line of sight from our bedroom. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type in the password to the secure server. It was a legacy account, one I probably shouldn't have even had access to anymore. The system booted up, a world map appeared, blank for a moment. Then I selected the device ID for the Star of Anya necklace. My breath hitched. A single pulsing red dot appeared on the screen. It wasn't in a crack house in the city. It wasn't on a boat to another country. It was 2 towns over, in a place called Northwood, a gritty industrial town known for its shuttered factories and its surplus of check-cashing joints. The dot was stationary, pulsing over a small, unremarkable building on a street lined with bail bondsmen and takeout restaurants. The business name was listed on the map data, Honest Abe's Pawn and Loan. My blood ran cold. The platform had another feature, one we'd use to track stolen goods through fences. It could interface with the digital transaction records of most pawn shop networks. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling the logs for that location. A list of recent transactions appeared. I scanned the dates. There it was. An entry from 2 days ago, the day of the robbery. Item description: ladies' sapphire and diamond necklace, vintage, transaction type. Pawn. And then the name on the ticket. The name of the person who had walked into that shop and traded my grandmother's legacy for a fistful of cash. It was a very, very familiar name. Brent Miller. The laptop screen wavered, the pulsing red dot blurring as my eyes filled with tears. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. The grief I had been performing for the last 24 hours vanished, burned away by a cold, sharp fury that was so intense it felt like I was being forged into something new. In the cold, sterile light of the bathroom, hunched over a laptop screen, the woman who had trusted her husband died, and someone else was born. It wasn't about the necklace anymore. It was about the lie. And I realized, with a terrifying clarity, that I was going to dismantle his entire world, piece by piece. The first wave was pure physical shock. The air punched out of my lungs, and I had to brace myself against the bathroom vanity to keep from sliding to the floor. The cold marble felt like a jolt of electricity, the only real thing in a world that had suddenly dissolved into a haze of betrayal. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a horror so profound it felt like I was looking at a stranger. Who was this woman? Who was the man she had married? Every memory of the past 10 years began to replay in my mind, but now they were all tainted, filmed over with the sick, greasy residue of this new reality. Our wedding day. The way Brent's voice had trembled when he said his vows, promising to love and protect me, to be my partner in all things. It had felt so real, so genuine. Now it was just a scene from a play, and he was a brilliant actor. I remembered the day we bought this house, the way he'd carried me over the threshold, whispering about the children we'd raise here, the life we would build within these walls. Was any of it real, or was I just a long-term investment? A resource to be tapped when the time was right? I sank down to the floor, the cold of the tile seeping into my bones. I wrapped my arms around my knees and let the silence of the house press in on me. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of his breathing from the other room. The sound that had soothed me to sleep for years now sounded monstrous, the exhalations of a predator resting after a successful hunt. My mind drifted back, searching for the signs, the red flags I must have missed, and once I started looking, they were everywhere, like a breadcrumb trail, leading directly to this moment. It started with his family. His mother, Janine, was a woman who wore her victimhood like a designer coat. She was a master of the passive-aggressive sigh, the backhanded compliment, the guilt trip disguised as maternal concern. She had always treated me with a kind of brittle politeness, the kind reserved for a wealthy in-law you have to tolerate. She doted on Brent, but her real sun and moon was her daughter, Chloe. Chloe was Brent's younger sister, a perpetually aspiring creative who floated from one failed business venture to the next, leaving a wake of debt and broken promises. First it was bespoke, hand-poured candles that smelled vaguely of burnt plastic. Then it was an artisanal dog biscuit bakery, which ended abruptly when a batch sickened half the dogs in the local park. Her latest project was something to do with curated vintage fashion, which seemed to mostly involve her buying expensive clothes and calling it inventory. Brent was her enabler, her knight in shining armor. I remembered countless conversations that I now saw in a horrifying new light. Chloe's just having a tough time with the landlord, Cammy. I'm just going to spot her a few hundred to get him off her back. It's an investment in her business, honey. Her vision is incredible, she just needs a little startup capital to get it off the ground. Mom's so worried about her. It's my duty as her big brother to help out. I had believed him. I thought it was sweet, a sign of his deep family loyalty. I saw our finances as one entity, and I made a good living, more than enough for us to be comfortable and for him to help out his family. I never questioned the amounts. I never looked too closely. Why would I? I trusted him. That was the whole point of a marriage, wasn't it? Trust. And then there was the jewelry itself. The Star of Anya necklace wasn't just a pretty trinket, it was a declaration. My grandmother, Anya, was a force of nature. She had escaped a war-torn country, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fire in her belly. She'd built a small but successful import business in a time when women were expected to be secretaries or wives. That necklace was the first truly extravagant thing she ever bought for herself. It was a symbol of her grit, her triumph over adversity. When she gave it to me on my 21st birthday, she'd held my hands and looked me straight in the eye. "Camilla," she'd said, her voice raspy but strong, "a man is a wonderful thing to have, but he is not a thing to need. A woman must always have her own money, her own power, her own escape route. This," she'd said, fastening the cold, heavy sapphires around my neck, "is your escape route. Don't you ever let a man take it from you." We had both laughed it off as my grandmother, being her usual dramatic self, but she had seen something in me, or perhaps she just knew the world better than I did. She'd also set up an ironclad trust for me. It wasn't a massive fortune, but it was enough to be life-changing. It had provided the down payment for our house and a comfortable cushion that had allowed Brent to quit his soul-crushing sales job 2 years ago to find his passion. Apparently, his passion was larceny. The memory of my grandmother's words echoed in the silent bathroom. "Don't you ever let a man take it from you." And he had. He had taken it and sold it for parts, hawked it in a dusty little shop in a forgotten town. The violation was so deep, so absolute, it was almost paralyzing. But then, another memory surfaced. The day I got the trackers installed, I had just been promoted to a senior position. I was proud, on top of the world. Brent had taken me out to celebrate. He'd been so charming, so supportive. My brilliant wife, he'd toasted, clinking his glass against mine. "Designing security for billionaires. Just don't get any ideas about tracking me." He'd winked, a playful little joke. I'd laughed and told him about the perk, about putting the trackers in my jewelry. He'd found it amusingly over the top. "You're so serious, Cammy. I love it." He'd known. He had known for years about the trackers. And he'd forgotten. In his arrogance, in his desperation, in his utter contempt for me, he had forgotten the one detail that would unravel his entire pathetic scheme. He hadn't just underestimated my sentimentality, he'd underestimated my intelligence. He saw me as the soft, trusting wife, the provider, the solution to his family's endless problems. He had never, not for 1 second, seen me as a threat. That was the thought that finally stopped the shaking. The cold resolve that had been forged in that first moment of fury now cooled and hardened into something diamond-sharp. This was not just a crime of opportunity. This was a crime born of disrespect. He had looked at my grandmother's legacy, a symbol of female strength and independence, and saw it as a quick fix for his feckless sister's financial irresponsibility. I stood up, my legs steady now. I went back to the laptop. I needed more than just the pawn ticket. I needed the entire story. I logged into our joint bank account. My eyes scanned the transaction history. I went back a month, 2 months, 3, and there it was. A single massive cash withdrawal by Brent from our savings account 1 month before the robbery. $5,000. It was followed by a string of smaller, panicked-looking ATM withdrawals. He was bleeding money. But that wasn't the catalyst. The catalyst was in his email. He was usually so careful about his digital footprint, but in his haste, he had missed one. It was in his trash folder, but not yet permanently deleted. The subject line was just one word. Help. It was from Chloe. The email was a frantic, rambling mess of terror and desperation. She had apparently invested in her vintage clothing business, with money from a loan shark, a man named Silvio, who was now demanding repayment with an interest rate that made my head spin. He had given her a deadline. He had threatened to visit their mother. He had threatened to break her legs. She was terrified. Brent, you have to help me. Mom doesn't know. If she finds out, it will kill her. You're the only one I can turn to. I need $10,000 by the end of the week. Please, Brent, please. I don't know what else to do. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw his reply, sent just a few hours later. It was short, confident, and utterly damning. Chloe, calm down. I'll handle it. Don't worry about Silvio. I have a plan. The money will be there. Just give me a few days. A few days. The email was dated the Tuesday before my weekend trip. The robbery happened on the Saturday I was away. His plan, his disgusting, cowardly, treacherous plan, was to steal from his own wife, to violate our home, our marriage, and the memory of my grandmother, all to clean up his sister's mess. He hadn't even had the guts to tell me the truth, to ask for help. He had decided, unilaterally, that my assets were his to liquidate. I closed the laptop with a soft, final click. The breakdown was over. The despair was gone. The woman who would have cried, who would have confronted him, who would have demanded an explanation, was gone. In her place was a cold, calculating strategist. He had mistaken my love for weakness and my trust for stupidity. He had started a war without even realizing who his opponent was, and I was going to finish it. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about taking back every single thing he thought he could take from me, and I knew exactly where to begin. The first rule of any successful operation is to never ever let your target know they are a target. So, the next morning, I made Brent coffee. I sat across from him at our sun-drenched breakfast nook and listened as he rehashed his theory about how the burglars must have been watching the house for weeks. I nodded, my face a carefully constructed mask of weary agreement. I even managed to produce a few tears when he mentioned the necklace again, dabbing at my eyes with a napkin. He bought all of it. He wrapped me in a hug, stroking my hair, murmuring, "We'll get through this, Cammy, I promise." It was like hugging a snake. I could feel the coldness of his skin even through his shirt. My mind was already miles away, running through logistics, building a strategy. A simple confrontation was an amateur's move. It would lead to a messy, emotional fight where he would deploy his arsenal of gaslighting and manipulative apologies. He would say he was desperate, that he was going to pay me back, that he did it for his family. He would try to make me feel guilty for his actions. No, that wouldn't do. I wasn't interested in his excuses. I was interested in consequences. Real, permanent, life-altering consequences. This required a plan, a foundation of undeniable proof, and a little help from my friends. My first call was to Maya. Maya and I had met during my tenure in the security world. While I was designing systems to protect physical assets, she was a forensic accountant who chased digital ghosts through complex financial records. She was brilliant, ruthless in her pursuit of a decimal point, and had a built-in lie detector that was more accurate than any polygraph. More importantly, she had never liked Brent. She'd always been polite, but I'd seen the look in her eyes at our wedding. She saw him as too smooth, too charming, too practiced. We met at a hole-in-the-wall cafe in a neighboring town, a place with cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of burnt coffee. It was perfect. Anonymous. I slid a slim manila folder across the table to her. It contained printouts of everything: the pawn shop transaction with Brent's name and driver's license number, the high-resolution photo from the shop's security camera showing him at the counter, the damning email exchange between him and Chloe, and a summary of the suspicious cash withdrawals from our account. Maya put on her reading glasses and examined each document in silence. She didn't look up, but a small, grim smile played on her lips. She finished the last page, took off her glasses, and leaned back in the booth. "Well," she said, her voice dry as dust, "the good news is you're not crazy. The bad news is you married a complete and utter scumbag." "I'm sorry, Cammy." "Don't be," I replied, my own voice surprising me with its steadiness. "I'm past sorry. I'm at the planning stage." Her eyes lit up, with a familiar predatory glint. This was the Maya I knew from boardrooms and late-night strategy sessions. "Okay," she said, leaning forward. "What's the objective?" "I want to know everything," I said. "He's been lying to me about his family's finances for years. I want to know how deep the rot goes. I want to see every secret credit card, every hidden loan, every dollar he has funneled to his sister. I want a complete financial autopsy of our marriage." "Consider it done," Maya said, tapping the folder. "Pro bono. It'll be my pleasure." "But what's your endgame here, Cammy?" "Divorce is messy. He'll still have a claim on the house, on half of everything." "That's my next call," I said. I think my grandmother may have planned for this. My next meeting was with a ghost from my past, Mr. Albright. He was my grandmother's estate lawyer, a man who seemed to be permanently preserved in the 1970s, from his tweed jacket to his meticulous politeness. He had handled her will and the creation of my trust. I met him in his quiet, wood-paneled office, a place that smelled of old books and leather. I explained the situation calmly and factually, presenting him with the same evidence I had shown Maya. He listened without interruption, his fingertips steepled together, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Your grandmother," he said finally, his voice a soft, gravelly rumble, "was an exceptionally shrewd woman. She did not believe in leaving things to chance, particularly when it came to men." He swiveled in his chair and pulled a thick, leather-bound document from a filing cabinet. It was my grandmother's will and the trust she had established. He opened it to a specific section, the pages crinkling with age. He slid it across the desk to me. "Please read section 4B, subparagraph C," he said. I leaned forward and read. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. It was a betrayal clause. My grandmother, in her infinite and slightly paranoid wisdom, had stipulated that the assets derived from her estate, which included the trust, the jewelry, and any property purchased with funds from the trust, were protected. The clause stated that if a spouse were found to have willfully and fraudulently attempted to liquidate, transfer, or otherwise misappropriate any of these assets for their own gain without my express written consent, their rights to any and all marital property connected to that trust would be immediately and irrevocably voided. I looked up at Mr. Albright, my heart pounding. "The down payment for our house," I whispered. "It came entirely from this trust." "Precisely," Mr. Albright said with a thin, satisfied smile. "The house, legally and morally, is an asset of the trust. By selling a piece of trust property, the necklace under fraudulent pretenses, your husband has, in effect, disinherited himself from the primary asset of your marriage. We would, of course, have to prove it in court, but given this evidence," he gestured to my folder, "I believe our position would be exceptionally strong." He wasn't just giving me legal advice, he was handing me a weapon of mass destruction. "There's more," he continued. "The insurance payout. Since the claim was filed based on a fraudulent robbery, that money constitutes fraud. The insurance company would be very, very interested to learn the truth, as would the police. Theft from a trust is a felony, Camila, as is insurance fraud." The scope of my plan suddenly expanded. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This was about a complete and total demolition. The final piece of my secret plan required me to get my hands dirty. Maya had connected me with a private investigator she used for difficult cases, a former cop named Sal, who specialized in asset recovery and witness persuasion. I hired him for a simple task. I wanted high-definition video surveillance of the exterior and interior of Honest Abe's pawn and loan. I also wanted him to find out everything he could about the owner. Sal delivered 2 days later. The report was concise. The owner was a man who cut corners, had a few complaints filed against him for undervaluing items, and was likely to be highly cooperative if faced with the threat of being implicated in receiving stolen property, especially property tied to a felony. The video footage was even better. It was a crystal-clear clip from the security camera over the counter. There was Brent, my husband, looking nervous and shifty, his eyes darting around the shop as he placed my grandmother's Star of Anya necklace on the worn counter. The camera caught the transaction, the cash being counted into his hand, and the grim, desperate look on his face as he shoved it into his pocket. It was the face of a man who had just sold his soul. I saved the video file to a secure encrypted drive. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the supportive, grieving wife. I went with Brent to look at security system upgrades. I discussed paint colors for the living room. I listened to his endless complaints about his sister's latest drama, all while feigning ignorance about the true cause of his stress. At night, I was a general planning a war. Maya worked her magic, her reports coming in like dispatches from the front line. She uncovered 2 secret credit cards Brent had opened, both maxed out. She found a personal loan he'd taken out against our shared car, a loan I had never known about. She created a detailed flowchart that showed a steady, relentless flow of money from our accounts to Chloe's over the past 3 years, totaling a staggering $50,000. He hadn't just been helping her out. He had been systematically draining our shared future to fund her irresponsible lifestyle, with his mother Janine acting as the emotional cheerleader. I had all my ammunition: the pawn ticket, the video, the emails, the financial audit from Maya, the legal opinion from Mr. Albright. My secret plan was no longer a secret to me. It was a detailed step-by-step blueprint for reclaiming my life. All that was left was to light the first match. The first move in a silent war isn't a cannon shot. It's the quiet cutting of supply lines. It's a move your enemy doesn't even feel until they try to take a step and find their legs have been cut out from under them. My first move was silent, digital, and devastatingly effective. Armed with Maya's forensic audit and the preliminary statement from Mr. Albright detailing the fraudulent activity, I walked into the main branch of our bank. I didn't go to a teller. I had an appointment with the branch manager, a stern woman named Miss Albright. No relation to my lawyer, a coincidence that felt like a wink from the universe. I laid out the evidence on her polished desk, the pawn ticket, the proof of the insurance claim, the clear paper trail of Brent's hidden debts, and the large, unexplained cash withdrawal that preceded the robbery. I calmly explained that our joint accounts, which held the recent and very substantial insurance payout, were currently compromised by my husband's fraudulent activities. I wasn't emotional, I was factual. I was a strategist presenting a risk assessment. Miss Albright listened, her expression growing more severe with each document she reviewed. Banks, I knew, are not interested in marital disputes, but they are pathologically averse to fraud, especially when it involves them. By the time I left her office an hour later, the process was in motion. Our joint checking and savings accounts were frozen, pending a formal fraud investigation. This included the account into which the six-figure insurance check had been deposited. All automatic payments were halted. All associated debit and credit cards were deactivated. Before walking out of the bank, I opened a new account in my name only, transferring my own personal savings into it from another institution. The war chest was secured. The first tremor hit Brent less than 24 hours later. I was in the kitchen, calmly chopping vegetables for a salad, when he walked in, tossing his keys on the counter with an air of frustration. "That's weird," he said, pulling his wallet from his pocket. "My card just got declined at the gas station. Had to pay with cash. You haven't had any issues, have you?" I looked up, my face a perfect portrait of mild concern. "No, that's strange. Maybe it's a system glitch. I can call the bank in the morning if you want." "Yeah, could you?" he said, already distracted, grabbing a beer from the fridge. Probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The next day, the real panic began to set in. He tried to pay for lunch with his friends and was declined again. He came home early, his face tight with a mixture of anger and confusion. "Cammy, what the hell is going on? I just spent an hour on the phone with the bank. They said the account is frozen. Something about an internal review? They wouldn't give me any details. Did you say something to them?" I put down the book I was reading and gave him a wide-eyed, innocent look. "Me? Why would I do that? This must be a mistake. It's probably related to that fraud alert we got last month. Remember? Their systems are probably just being overly cautious." I was a virtuoso of plausible deniability. He seemed to accept it, for now. But the pressure was mounting. His secret credit cards, the ones Maya had uncovered, were already maxed out. His access to our shared pool of money and the insurance money he'd stolen to get, was gone. He was financially castrated, and he didn't even know who held the knife. Then came the second wave of my attack, aimed not at him but at his support system. The calls from his family started. First it was Janine, his mother, her voice dripping with syrupy concern that did little to mask the steel beneath. "Camilla, dear," she began. "Brent was just telling me you're having some trouble with the bank. I do hope everything is all right. Chloe was counting on him for a little help this week with her business expenses." "Oh, it's just a silly mix-up, Janine," I said, my tone light and breezy. "These big banks are so bureaucratic. I'm sure Brent will have it all sorted out in a day or two." A day later, the call was from Chloe herself, and there was no syrup, only raw panic. "Camilla, what is going on? Brent's not answering my calls. He promised me that money. Silvio. He's not a patient man. You have to do something." This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment to tighten the screws. "Chloe," I said, my voice dropping into a tone of deep, sincere sympathy. "I'm so sorry you're in this position. It must be terribly stressful, but our finances are completely tied up right now. The bank has everything on hold. I have no access to anything. I'm afraid you and Brent are on your own for this one." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sputtering rage. "On our own? This is your fault. You're his wife. You're supposed to handle this." I'm sorry you feel that way, I said calmly, and I hung up the phone. The noise versus silence phase of the operation had begun. Their panic, their demands, their accusations, it was all just noise. My response was a wall of serene, unbreachable silence. I let Brent's calls go to voicemail. I stopped responding to his increasingly frantic texts. I moved into the guest room, telling him I needed space to process the trauma of the robbery. He was a man trapped in a house with a ghost. I was there, but I was gone. He was unraveling. He started pacing again, just as he had on the day of the fake robbery, but this time his performance was for an audience of one, and it was utterly devoid of charm. It was the desperate, ugly panic of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him for reasons he couldn't comprehend. He thought the problem was the bank. He thought it was a technical glitch. He had no idea that the problem was the quiet woman reading a book in the other room. The woman he had dismissed as a soft, easy mark. The enemy was inside the gates, and he had invited her in himself. The shift from silent takeover to open warfare was triggered by a knock on the door. It wasn't a tentative tap, it was a series of hard, insistent raps that echoed through the house. I glanced at the security camera feed on my phone. It was Janine. Her face, usually composed in a mask of gentle martyrdom, was pinched and furious. She was here to breach the walls. Brent scrambled to the door. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I am here to talk some sense into your wife," she declared, pushing past him into the foyer. "This has gone on long enough." I didn't move from the living room couch. I simply watched them, my expression placid. This was the desperate counter-manipulation I had been expecting. The final, messy attempt to re-establish control through emotional brute force. Janine marched toward me, her hands on her hips. "Camila, I don't know what kind of game you are playing, but it stops now. Chloe is beside herself with worry. Brent is a mess. You have frozen them out financially and emotionally. We are a family. You don't just do this to family." Her use of the royal we was telling. In her mind, my marriage to Brent was an acquisition. My resources were now part of the Miller family portfolio, to be managed and distributed by her, the CEO of familial guilt. I took a slow sip of my tea before answering, letting the silence stretch. "Janine," I said, my voice even and calm, "this is a matter between my husband and me. I'd appreciate it if you would respect our privacy." "Privacy?" She scoffed, her voice rising. "You make a decision that cripples my children and you want privacy. That money is for the good of this family. Chloe needs it." Brent hovered behind her, looking helpless. "Mom, maybe we should talk about this later." "No, Brent, we'll talk about it now," she snapped, turning on him. "You need to handle your wife. This is unacceptable." It was a fascinating and horrifying display of their dynamic. He wasn't her son, he was her tool. I wasn't his wife, I was a malfunctioning appliance he needed to fix. This was the moment I decided to sever the connection for good. I stood up. "Janine, this is my house. I am asking you politely to leave." Her jaw dropped. She looked at Brent, expecting him to intervene, to handle me, but he just stood there, paralyzed by the collision of his two worlds. "I will not," she shrieked. "Not until you see reason." "Fine," I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed 3 numbers. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report a trespasser at my address." "No, she's not armed, just hysterical." Janine's face went white. The threat of public humiliation was the one weapon she couldn't counter. She stared at me, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred that was far more honest than her years of fake smiles. "You will regret this," she hissed. "I doubt it," I said. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Brent finally found his voice. "Did you just call the cops on my mother?" he yelled, his face red. "She was trespassing," I replied simply, "and she refused to leave." "This is insane, Camila. You've gone crazy. Ever since the robbery you've been paranoid and controlling. You block my sister, you freeze our money, you kick my mother out. What is wrong with you?" It was the textbook gaslighter's defense. Attack. accuse and reframe the victim's reaction as the original problem, but it had no effect on me anymore. I was inoculated against his poison. "I'm not crazy, Brent," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm just done." I walked past him and went to the guest room, locking the door behind me. That night, I finalized the last steps of my plan. I had my lawyer, Mr. Albright, draft a formal cease and desist letter to Janine, legally barring her from contacting me or setting foot on my property. I had him prepare the divorce papers, and I had him schedule a meeting with the fraud division of our insurance company for the following week. The next few days were a cold war fought within the walls of our own home. We were two ghosts haunting the same space, communicating only through slammed doors in the tense, heavy silence. He tried everything. He left apologetic notes on the guest room door. He made my favorite dinner and left a plate outside for me, a pathetic offering. He sent long, rambling texts, a cocktail of feigned remorse and accusations. "Cammy, please talk to me. We can fix this. I don't know what I did, but I'm sorry. You're tearing this family apart over a bank error." I ignored it all. I was waiting for the perfect moment for the final confrontation. Not a moment of his choosing, born of his panic, but a moment of my choosing, executed with precision and control. He thought he was fighting to get his life back to normal. He had no idea that normal was already a crater, and he was standing at the bottom of it. The exodus was complete. I had fully withdrawn from his family, his finances, and his life. All that was left was to show him the door. The end came on a Tuesday. I chose a Tuesday because it was ordinary. It wasn't a weekend, filled with the pressure of shared time, or a Monday, burdened by the start of a week. It was just a Tuesday, a day of no significance, which felt fitting for the dismantling of a life that had turned out to be meaningless. I waited for him to come home from whatever aimless wandering he did during the day, now that his funds were cut off. I had spent the afternoon preparing the stage. The dining room table, a piece of dark, solid oak that we had once imagined hosting decades of happy family dinners, was now a tribunal. I laid everything out with the precision of a museum curator, displaying artifacts of a dead civilization. In the center, I placed my tablet, its screen glowing. On it was the live GPS map, the red dot of my grandmother's necklace, still pulsing patiently from inside Honest Abe's pawn and loan. To the left of the tablet, I arranged a series of 8x10 glossy photos I'd had printed. The first was a crystal-clear still from the pawn shop's security camera. Brent, his face pale and sweaty, sliding the Star of Anya across the counter. The next was a close-up of the pawn ticket, his name and signature clearly visible. To the right of the tablet, I placed a stack of papers. On top was the email from Chloe, her desperate plea for money. Beneath it was Maya's financial audit, a neat, damning summary of his secret debts and the $50,000 he had siphoned away to his sister. At the very bottom was a single, crisp legal document, the divorce petition Mr. Albright had prepared. When I heard his key in the lock, my heart gave a single hard thud, and then settled into a calm, steady rhythm. He walked in, looking tired and defeated, ready to launch into another round of pleading or accusations. He opened his mouth to speak, but then he saw the table. He stopped dead in the hallway. His eyes darted from one piece of evidence to the next. I saw the exact moment, the blood drained from his face. It was as if his entire nervous system had shut down. The carefully constructed facade of the charming, wronged husband didn't just crack, it disintegrated into dust, revealing the weak, terrified man underneath. He looked from the table to me. I was standing by the window, my arms crossed, saying nothing. The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than any words could ever be. He stumbled forward, his hand reaching for the photo of himself at the pawn shop, as if he could somehow make it disappear. "Cammy," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was flat, cold, clinical. I was going to get it back, he stammered, his eyes wide and pleading. I swear, it was just a loan. I was going to get the insurance money and buy it back before you ever knew. It was for Chloe. She was in trouble. Real trouble. I didn't want to worry you. I was going to fix it. The lies were pathetic now, stripped of their power. They were the last gasps of a dying narrative. You weren't going to fix it, Brent, I said, walking slowly toward the table. I pointed to Maya's report. You were going to use the insurance money to pay off the $10,000 you owed the loan shark, and then you were going to continue to bleed our finances dry to support your sister's next inevitable failure, just like you've been doing for the last 3 years. His eyes widened in shock. He had no idea I knew the extent of it. How? You underestimated me, I said simply. You saw me as your wife, your partner, your provider. You never saw me as a security strategist. You forgot who I was, what I'm capable of. I picked up the divorce papers. I also spoke to Mr. Albright, my grandmother's lawyer. I saw a new flicker of fear in his eyes. You see, he reminded me about the betrayal clause in her trust, the one you probably thought was just the ramblings of a dramatic old woman. I let the words hang in the air. By fraudulently selling an asset of the trust, the necklace, you have forfeited any and all claim to marital property purchased with funds from that trust. I paused, letting the final blow land. That includes this house, Brent. The down payment was a gift from my grandmother, funneled through the trust. Legally, this house has never been half yours. And now it is entirely mine. The last bit of color left his face. He looked around the room, at the walls, the furniture, the life he thought he had secured, and I could see him realizing it was all an illusion. He had nothing. He finally broke. He sank into one of a dining chair, his head in his hands, and he began to sob, not the dignified, cracking voice of his performance, but ugly, heaving, desperate sobs. He begged. He pleaded. He said he loved me. He said he would do anything, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even satisfaction. It was like watching a stranger have a breakdown. The man I had loved was a fiction he had created, and that man was long dead. I want you to pack a bag, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I want you to take your personal belongings, and I want you to be out of this house in 1 hour. He looked up, his face a mess of tears and desperation. Camila, please, where will I go? I imagine you'll go to your mother's, I said. You 3 seem to be very good at sharing resources. I told him that Mr. Albright would be in touch with his lawyer. I told him that a police report for insurance fraud and theft from a trust was being filed in the morning. I told him it was over. He didn't move for a long time. Then, slowly, like an old man, he stood up and walked upstairs. I stood in the dining room, listening to the sounds of him opening and closing drawers, the sounds of our life being dismantled. An hour later, he came down the stairs with a single suitcase and a gym bag. He wouldn't look at me. He walked to the front door, opened it, and then paused for a second, his back to me. I really did love you, Camille, he whispered to the door. No, Brent, I said to his back. You loved what I provided. There's a difference. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Then he walked out, closing the door softly behind him. I stood in the silent house, the artifacts of his betrayal still laid out on the table. I picked up the tablet and looked at the pulsing red dot. It wasn't just a tracker anymore. It was a beacon, a north star that had guided me out of the darkness. My grandmother had been right. She'd given me an escape route. It had just taken me 10 years to realize I needed to use it. In the end, the new reality was much quieter than the old one. Brent, faced with incontrovertible evidence, pleaded guilty to insurance fraud. He avoided jail time, but his felony record, hefty fines and court-ordered restitution left him broken. He, Chloe, and Janine ended up exactly where they belonged together, crammed into Janine's tiny two-bedroom condo. Their world of entitlement shrunk to the size of a spare room. The house, my house, was sold. I couldn't stand the ghosts. The police recovered my grandmother's necklace, and the day I went to the station to retrieve it, I held its cold, familiar weight in my hand, and it felt like coming home to myself. I've learned that trust isn't something you give just once, it's something you have to verify, continuously. And I learned that the little voice in your gut, the one that whispers when something feels wrong, is usually right. Have you ever ignored that voice? Have you ever looked at the person next to you and had a fleeting thought that you didn't really know them at all? Sometimes, the greatest betrayals don't come from enemies, but from the people who promise to protect us. But the most important thing I learned is that your own strength is the one asset no one can ever take from you. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming my own story. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been through something similar, or if you've ever had to find the strength to start over, I'd love to read your story in the comments below. It helps all of us to know we aren't alone in these fights. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more. Your support means the world.